I wrote on offthehooksports.com that you can check out, and provided stats. I think bolstering my argument that Joe Milton is a game manager. And that leads us to today's tough question.
Today's tough question. Take a side. Take a stand. The Dave Hooker Show, a presentation of offthehooksports.com.
All right, I believe that's where we are. That Joe Milton is a game manager. I thought there were some telling quotes by offensive coordinator Joey Halzle that essentially confirmed as much. And I think when you look at the stats, that is pretty much the case. Tennessee's a running football team, and they like to throw a lot of screens. And I think because of Joe Milton's inaccuracy, they're a little afraid to throw the ball downfield. So, Caleb, is Joe Milton a game manager first? But today's tough question is this: is that an okay thing for the Vols? They don't have a Hendon Hooker, but let's remember, Hendon Hooker was one of the most highly regarded quarterbacks in the NFL draft in this past April. He would have gone higher had it not been for the ACL injury. So you're not going to have that type of guy every year. So I go back to T. Martin. Was T. Martin as great as Peyton Manning? No, T. Martin wasn't a game manager either. So maybe it's a bad comparison. But you can go from a great quarterback to a good quarterback and still be a very good football team. I'll ask you simply, is Joe Milton a game manager?
Yes. I mean, particularly relative to this era of college football, even more so, because you might see him end up with more yards and touchdowns than T. Martin, but that has to be graded on a curve, right? Given the style of play in college football today versus 1998.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And the fact of the matter is, the biggest reason he's a game manager is, where are most of his completions? The vast majority of his completions are behind the line of scrimmage. Honestly, he's barely being trusted to complete anything over the middle or deep shots down the sideline. Now, in his defense, well, it's not really in his defense. I would have said in his defense, the deep balls aren't there like they were last year. And I would say it's because defense is adjusted. But the only reason they've adjusted is because they've been able to, because Joe Milton can't hit the simple passes over the middle, or he misreads a safety, or he underthrows a touchdown pass to a tight end. And because of that, I think that's the reason the deep shots aren't there. And so I think at this point, yes, he is a game manager, and that's okay. Look, I think we heard a lot of positive talk about Joe Milton in the offseason, but before that came about, my outlook for this year was that it was always a transition year. It was always a transition year for Joe Milton to be the caretaker of the program as Tennessee goes from Hendon Hooker to Nico Iamaleava. The same way I kept saying it, this Tennessee team is 2014 Clemson with Cole Stout. Everybody in Clemson knew that was a transition year from Taj Boyd to Deshaun Watson. And Cole Stout was just there to be the caretaker until Deshaun Watson was ready to go.
What if Cole Stout's ears are burning somewhere? I bet he didn't think he'd be the topic of conversation on an SEC/Tennessee show. That's a pretty good reference.
Yeah, I mean, you remember that Clemson team, right? I mean, it was obvious that Deshaun Watson was who everybody was waiting on to be the superstar quarterback. And whatever you think about Deshaun Watson personally, I have no defense of him, but just on the field, I think everybody knew that Taj Boyd had gone to the NFL. Deshaun Watson's going to be a star, but Deshaun Watson's not ready. So let's start Cole Stout this year, have a 9-4, 10-3 type season, and then we'll be ready to unleash with Deshaun Watson the next year. Everybody in Clemson knew that was the case. And right, so I think that's the situation now.
On the message board, Halzle is a dope. Anyone who says Joe's playing at a really high level doesn't deserve to be the offensive coordinator of a middle school team. Now, let's be real.
What do you expect him to say?
Yeah, Halzle's not going to come out and say that this guy can't make the throws that you want him to. He's going to say what's right by his man, and that's exactly what he's doing. As a matter of fact, his quote, I want to get to that because it basically just says he's a game manager and they have little faith in him, reading in between the lines. It's brought to you by Andy Mason Real Estate. AndyMasonRealEstate.com. Real estate experts with over 4 decades combined experience in East Tennessee. Best prices, best service in the Knoxville area. Andy Mason realestate.com. He says, quote, he's done a really good job of managing the game. He hasn't put the ball in a ton of precarious situations. We had a couple last week, which is really the first time, but he's done a good job of running the offense, not just trying to go out there and be an athlete with a big arm. So it sounds like to me that that despite the ability, that they're comfortable with him being a game manager, and they're not going to vary from that. I don't think you're going to see Joe Milton up and start to throw 75-yard passes down the field like he's known for. Caleb, it sounds like they're just fine with this, and they feel like they can win 9, 10, 11 games with him doing what he's doing and the rest of this football team continuing to fill out. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think this is an underrated aspect of Josh Heupel's system that nobody ever really paid attention to. And if you really follow Josh Heupel from when he was at Missouri to UCF to now Tennessee, there's this philosophy, there's always the debate on does an offensive coach, do they force players into their system? Do you want that? Or do you want the David Cutcliffe, who was honestly, David Cutcliffe as an offensive coordinator was a mold of clay and just fully adapted to whatever his personnel was. I think Josh Heupel has done a pretty good job being a mix. Yes, he has a system, the wide splits, the up tempo, but he really adjusts to his personnel. And he did that a lot at other stops. I think there was one year at Missouri, he had a tight end be his leading receiver, which you don't really see with Josh Heupel. Then he had a wideout in 2021. He had a slot receiver in 2022. And now he's relying more heavily on the run game and screen passes. And I think the underrated, it reminds me of, again, not a fan of him as a person, but when Urban Meyer and Dan Mullen in 2006 had Chris Leak, didn't necessarily seem like a fit for their spread offense, but they successfully tweaked their spread offense to fit Chris Leak and what he was doing. And you see Josh Heupel, I think, tweaking significantly his offense. I made up a phrase for it last year. I call this offense the veer and shoot because it's a combination of the run and shoot, air raid, and the veer, I feel like, from back in the day. You're seeing him tweak that significantly this year. And honestly, that's although his talent evaluation is an issue, that's a major testament to him as a play caller and a game planner that he's done that.
Let's face it, with the transfer portal, you're going to crap out at quarterback every once in a while. And I'm not saying that Tennessee has, but if you look at Alabama, they're making the best of what they can with a bad situation. Roto22 says, I don't think enough is said about some of the good throws Milton has made. He has the ability to make good throws, but the talk is always if he has no ability whatsoever. I think he has plenty of ability, Roto22. He continues to say if you go back and watch all the games he got to play last year, he consistently made great throws, mop-up duty or not, the ability was still there. But here's the issue I have, Roto22, with what you're saying, is I go back to the Ole Miss game in 2021, and I just don't know that Joe Milton is 100% comfortable being a starting SEC quarterback, Caleb. And I know that perhaps the mentality is there, or sorry, the physical ability, but I don't know that the mentality is, and I think that's part of the issue.
Yeah, I thought that was an issue from the start, is the confidence. And we talked about this. He panics. He panics the minute things spiral. And look, I know you have a good point. It's like it's only made worse by the fact that he's lost his starting job at 2 different schools. So I think now when things just go a little bit awry, he starts to panic and then it spirals. I think that's exactly what happened against Austin Peay. I don't think he panicked at Florida. That was a succession of things that honestly weren't necessarily his fault. I didn't blame him heavily for the Florida game, really. But against South Carolina, I do think he panicked a little bit. I just don't think it mattered because the run game was so dominant. But let's be honest, he throws that interception, spots South Carolina a 10-7 lead. On the next drive, he missed one throw, and he actually missed Squirrel White on that 50-yard pass that I think changed the game. Squirrel White just made an amazing play on the ball. That was a terrible throw by Milton, if you go back and look at it. And so I think Joe Milton...
I'm completely with you. But Travis says here, I don't want to sound like a Joe Milton bashing session because it's not. Travis says if we were 5-1 after Saturday and we're in the SEC with wins over South Carolina and A&M, we should all be happy. Totally agree. 100% agree. And Joe Milton can do that. So game managers kind of like the pain tolerance term. Quarterback/athletes don't like that because it questions their ability to run an offense as a quarterback or their toughness, respectively. So it's kind of one of those hot button terms, but it's not a bad thing for this football team and what they need this year. It's not as exciting as last year, but it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, game manager. I love when quarterbacks get mad about being a game manager. Okay, quarterbacks who get upset about that, guys, half the quarterbacks we talk about in football, we call them scrubs, can't play, waste of a roster spot. A game manager is a major step above that, isn't it, Dave? We're saying you're not going to be the one who could put this team on your back and win, but you can win games if you're in the right offense and with the right personnel. That's still a pretty good compliment at this level in the SEC.